Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's live stream. My name is Jib, and I will be hosting an informal discussion on the Transcendental Argument for God, also known as TAG, between Wi-Fi Gospel and David, also known as Faith Because of Reason. As the host, I will be handling logistics like introductions, starting the discussion, and audience questions. We're planning for the discussion to be at least an hour, maybe max 2 hours, depending on how Wi-Fi and David feel about the amount of audience questions. We'll give about 20 minutes near the end for audience questions. And if we get a lot of audience questions, maybe we'll open up the audience segment earlier than that. So what started this dialogue was a super chat between Wi-Fi and David on whether David likes tech. And David provided his quick critique, which eventually sparked planning this conversation between them. And so the goal of this discussion is pretty open-ended, but it's surrounding tag and its effectiveness. This isn't blood sports or anything, and there won't be any dogpiling. All right, can I introduce you guys?
Yeah, before you do, well, actually, I'll say that after when more people are in here. Go ahead.
So on the left, we have Alex Medeiros, also known as Wi-Fi Gospel. He's a Christian debater using the presuppositional approach. Alex likes to debate atheists and anti-Christians on multiple platforms and channels such as Modern Day Debate, The Raging Tomato, and DebateCon. He also does debate reviews and short-form content on the variety of cultural issues. You can check out Wi-Fi Gospel's channel and his debate catalog, which is a playlist called Debates. On the right, we have David Pallmann, also known as Faith Because of Reason. David is an evangelical Christian who has an apologetics and theology channel using the non-presuppositional approach. He attempts to use his best research in philosophy, science, and biblical studies to make the case for Christian theism. David also is a student at Trinity Bible College and Theological Seminary. He is also a member of the Society of Evangelical Arminians. You can check out his channel, Faith Because of Reason, where he has a lot of interesting content. All right.
Is there anything that Job missed that you'd like to share, Dave?
Well, one update. I'm not a student at Trinity anymore. I'm a graduate now. But other than that, good introduction.
Sorry about that.
And Dave he's
a graduate.
He's not an anti-Christian. So I'd usually just debate like atheists and anti-theists. And that's why this is more framed as a discussion, just because I really don't debate other Christians. But Dave's a nice guy. He's really respectful. And he has some issues with tag. And he saw some of my debates, and now I'm speaking for him. But from what he said to me was that it didn't seem to him that the opposition pushed back quite as well as he would have liked, and he thinks that he can provide better pushback, right?
That was generally the gist of it. I tend to dislike most of the objections that are out there to presuppositional apologetics, particularly in the online sphere. And you seemed like a generally, nice, good faith person, because there are, meaning no offense, but a lot of presuppositionalists I don't feel like I could reason with, but you seemed like one that I could. And you also seemed a little more knowledgeable in philosophy than some of them. So I thought it might be a little more productive to have the conversation. And I do appreciate you for agreeing to it.
Yeah, awesome. Same here. Thanks for doing this. Have you talked to other presuppositional apologists like in this format?
I mean, I had a debate with Seth Bloomsburg on the Gospel Truth probably like 4 or 5 years ago now on this topic, and maybe 1 or 2 since. I think I had a kind of dialogue with Joshua Pillows on Eli Ayala's channel, Revealed Apologetics, but it's typically been like the Calvinist wing of presuppositionalism, which I know was sort of, I know you were a part of that for a while, but you are either transitioning or thinking about transitioning to the Eastern Orthodox wing, which I'm somewhat familiar with, but not as familiar with. So it's also a little bit of a new opportunity for me to kind of engage that side of the presuppositionalist spectrum.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, Eli, I know Eli. I've talked to him a few times. He's a good guy too. I haven't talked to Joshua or Seth. I actually don't know Seth, but I have seen Joshua do quite a few things. He kind of stays like more on the academic side of things, right, Joshua Pillows?
He thinks he does.
Okay. As far as audience question goes, super chats will be prioritized. Otherwise, you can write Q4, either Wi-Fi or Dave, and then your questions so that we can keep track of them throughout the discussion. Yeah, so real quick for me, I don't have any formal training at all. I actually dropped out of high school, and I was saved shortly after that. And so prior to that, I had no interest in anything academic. And afterwards, just to kind of, I had a spiritual experience that led me to belief in Jesus, but all the intellectual stuff came after, right? Like once people started pushing back on my faith and they were like, I was like, oh, I don't have answers for these. Like, I got to make sure that what I believe is true, right? Because I did have this spiritual experience, but at the end of the day, people cite spiritual experiences for all sorts of different beliefs. So there is an intellectual side, right? We don't just have blind faith in Christianity. At least I don't think me or Dave do. I know some people may say that, right? But I had my first debate when I was 21, and it was against the Atheist Humanist Society of Connecticut's president. I can't remember his name, but it's not even on this channel that I have. It's on a different channel, but it's in my debates playlist if anybody wants to see it. It was an in-person debate, and I was a Calvinist at the time. And, you could tell that I didn't have a full grasp on the arguments, but it was at a time where many people were unfamiliar with tag. It's about 8 years ago, but definitely this individual, very unfamiliar. But as far as like philosophy goes, I don't know a bunch of the history of philosophy. I know more of the terms in epistemology, but in general, I don't have I'm definitely not an expert, and I don't have the best grasp on philosophy in general. But with the topics surrounding tag, I've studied quite a bit of them. And part of what led me to inquiring into orthodoxy was coming across J. Dyer and Father Deacon Ananias, who, in my opinion, have a much deeper understanding of the transcendental argument for God. Whereas when I was a Calvinist for about 10 years, I learned a lot of the basics, and I have a bunch of respect and love for the guys who do presuppositional apologetics in that realm. But when even looking for things such as a syllogism, the first syllogism I ever heard for presuppositional apologetics was from Eli, and it was just maybe a couple years ago. And so diving deep into tag was hard to find. Even reading, I read a bunch of Bonson early on, and I couldn't really find specific answers to the harder objections that come across. And I was kind of disappointed in that. But reading papers from Father Deacon Ananias and listening to his videos and stuff, along with Jay Dyer, has definitely broadened my understanding. I'm just going to put up this banner real quick. Is there anything that you wanted to start with, Dave?
Well, maybe some common ground would be, I think we have similar concerns in terms of what I think our primary objection is going to be to the other person's basic, methodology. Obviously, we're discussing apologetic methodology, but apologetics is the project of justifying the Christian faith. So inevitably, of course, that does tie it to concerns in epistemology. And so fundamentally, we have two different epistemologies on the table here. And a concern that I have, and I think that presuppositionalists generally share, is that we think that the other side's epistemology is going to put you in a position where you can't actually end up knowing anything. We think global skepticism basically is going to be entailed by the other side. So in terms of that goal of wanting to avoid global skepticism, we have some common ground there. Beyond that, I think the differences are going to be pretty few and far between. Obviously, our ultimate conclusions that we are both Christians, albeit of different varieties, but that we are both Christians will end up in similar places. But obviously, we're a little bit concerned with how we're getting there. I'll have issues with the way you're getting there. You'll have issues with the way I'm getting there. And so, of course, that's where the conversation will focus. But I just thought it might be helpful to get what I think the main thing that both of us are trying to avoid, namely global skepticism, that is a goal that we share. So in terms of that, at least, we have a common starting point.
Awesome. Yeah, so another thing that we could say is common ground is probably our politics. I don't know too much about your politics other than some, because like you said, you don't really post too much about it. But with the recent events, with the tragedy of the assassination of Charlie Kirk, I did see you made a few posts, and from what I've gathered from those posts, I think we probably have a lot of common ground there as well. And I don't know if you see yourself in any future with politics or maybe activism in a sense, but maybe we could do something together in that. I think a lot of us have been kind of motivated to do more in that realm because of Charlie Kirk. So
yeah, I mean, I hate politics. I've never wanted to be involved in it, but it's the left has gone so crazy on stuff. They've forced it into literally everything. That, I mean, they've turned me into something of a right-wing activist just because they haven't given me a choice. Because I would have much preferred to just stay in my own little bubble, do philosophy, do debates, do theology, and let politics do what it will. Unfortunately, they refuse to let me, and so yes, I'm making some effort to fight back finally, because I don't feel like I have a choice.
Yeah, I definitely share that, although I am more willing to go into activism. Say I like to debate probably like political ideology more than like a Trump versus Biden kind of thing, but like abortion, feminism, transgender issues, stuff like that. I do see myself doing a lot of those debates in the future.
Yeah,
would you ever consider doing those types of debates?
I would, and I would actually prefer that political discourse would focus on, policy and social issues, and not, who can throw the most mud on Donald Trump, because he's going to be gone in another 4 years, and like life has to move on. So we can't build our lives around Donald Trump.
Yeah, it's actually interesting seeing all of the people vying for his position on the right. You're starting to see people start to build narratives. I think even Donald Trump Jr. I think, yeah, he just posted something recently that was interesting about just kind of a narrative build of like building his story. So I wonder if maybe he might try to go for that position. That'll be interesting. But enough about politics. I mean, this is a tag stream. So do you think maybe I should start off with kind of like a positive account for tag, or do you kind of want to get into your main issues first?
If you want to lay out your understanding of it, that's fine. One thing I guess I'll say from the start is I know a big part of the presuppositionalist method dialectically is generally pushing back on the interlocutor, asking them generally questions about challenging issues in philosophy. I don't have a problem with you doing that with me, because I have opinions on all of these things, happy to share them. Just in general, there's often this aversion to having the roles reversed and having the skeptic of presuppositionalism get to ask the presuppositionalists some of the same questions about their perspective. So I would appreciate the opportunity to also be able to do that with you at some point. So, feel free to hit me with all the hardest questions you like. I just want the opportunity to, ask them back at you.
Absolutely not. No, that's absolutely fair. And I think the reason for that is because the main argument is kind of a disjunct, right? And I'll get into it, but the main argument is like knowledge exists, and if we can have a true disjunct between God being the necessary condition for knowledge, or God not being the necessary condition for knowledge, and we can show that the view that God is not a necessary condition for knowledge is false, then it only leaves one other view. But I'm happy to answer questions as well. Let me bring up some of my notes here and just kind of lay out the general argument. All right. I'm just going to put out, instead of going through all of this, kind of just some quick syllogisms. And I don't know if you even have a problem with the first two, but we talked a little bit about the third one, and I want to say I butchered that conversation, and I was at work, and just probably I don't even know what was going on, so I apologize for that. My answers here may seem different than the ones. It's not a pulling the wool over your eyes. I just genuinely butchered that conversation.
Fair enough.
So the first kind of syllogism is, if knowledge is possible, then God exists. Knowledge is possible, therefore God exists. Obviously, this doesn't say much, but it is making a conditional statement, right? And the fair pushback is, what makes God exist, or what makes it the case that if knowledge is possible, God must exist, right? I think that's a fair pushback.
Yeah,
but
that's
before
a challenge.
Yeah. Okay. So you would agree then that knowledge is possible?
Yes, I would actually, not generally for the reasons that you give for it, but those are neither here nor there for the purposes of this conversation. I do agree with that premise for different reasons. So yes, the first premise is the one I would target.
Cool. And that would lead us to the second premise here. Second syllogism. Either God is a necessary condition for the possibility of knowledge, A, or not A. Or not A. It is not the case that God is not necessary, not A. Therefore, God is a necessary condition. So this is put forward as a disjunct with a true dichotomy, using double negation elimination as the inference rule to get the conclusion. Do you have any issues with this?
I just think it's redundant. It seems like it's the same argument over again. The second premise of this one seems to me pretty much identical to the first premise of the original argument. I don't really see a substantial difference between them. So yeah, it's a valid argument. It's just, I feel like the exact same questions that I'm going to apply to premise 1 of the original argument are going to apply to premise 2 of this argument. So I don't object to it any more than I do the first one. I just feel like it's redundant.
Okay, we can go back to that. And then this one here, you'll notice I added a word on this third one. I think you probably already know the word, but if autonomous epistemology is true, reason, or you could say knowledge, must justify itself. Reason cannot justify itself without vicious circularity. Therefore, autonomous epistemology is not true. And so autonomous epistemology and theonomous epistemology are basically the idea that God is a necessary condition for the possibility of knowledge, which would be theonomous epistemology, or God is not a necessary condition for the possibility of knowledge, which would be autonomous epistemology. I can find better definitions for those two terms, but yeah, what do you think about that?
Well, so that one is a little bit clearer to me. I guess I have some concerns about it insofar as autonomous epistemology here is pretty much being treated as anything that is not presuppositionalism. Would that be correct?
Yeah, because you can have, well, anything that wouldn't start with a God that has a minimal set of attributes. So if you want to say that's presuppositional, then yeah. Okay,
yeah. So I guess one concern there, I don't want to make a big deal about this because this is not really going to be my primary objection. But I guess it seems like you're putting every other epistemology that's not yours or pretty close to yours is going in this other bucket of autonomous epistemology. And a lot of these other epistemologies, mine is not included among them, but a lot of them are going to reject the idea that you actually need justification for knowledge, right? Alvin Plantinga pretty famously rejected this, right, in his theory of warrant and proper function. This is pretty much rejected in process reliabilism. So like the prevailing externalist theories of knowledge that are out there today, which is most of them, they reject that you need justification for sort of like at the most foundational level for your belief. They're going to appeal to something else like proper function or reliable processes, something like that. So at the very least, that seems like a dubious premise because it seems like it's saying any alternative to presuppositionalism is sort of committed to the idea that you have to justify things. Now, you could argue for the idea that you do. And I would actually agree with that because I don't want to reject justification. So that's why I would actually agree with you there. And that's why I don't want to make that like the cornerstone of my objection. I guess it's just that knowing that like most philosophers aren't going to accept that in the field of epistemology, I feel like some legwork kind of needs to be done to motivate that premise. And I'm not saying you couldn't do it, but in the premise that almost just seems taken for granted, if that concern is clearer.
Okay. Yeah, I think I understand. Let me see if I can give it back to you. So first, you're not saying that this isn't your epistemology, but you are saying that this argument puts all of these other epistemologies in a bucket and says they're false. So I have to show that they're false in order to make the argument work, even though it's not your epistemology. Did you get that first part right?
Not even quite that, because I agree that they're false, right? It's that they aren't going to accept this requirement that they have to be able to justify themselves at like the bottommost level, whatever their most foundational commitments are. They're going to reject the idea that they need justification there. And it's sort of assumed in the premise that you are going to need justification all the way down.
Okay. And then I want to get to that, but there's something you said that was interesting to me. When you said, you prefaced by saying this is not my epistemology, I think you may have just been talking about the justificatory theories, but would you say that your epistemology starts with God, or that God is a necessary condition for the possibility of knowledge?
I wouldn't say, I think I wouldn't say that I start with God, certainly. And a little bit about necessary there. I would kind of want to understand what modal scope we're using there. So, I mean, I don't, probably in none of them, the answer is no. But I mean, so like in like the strictest ones, it's not like, I don't think it's logically necessary, for example. I don't think it's epistemically necessary. Maybe it's like metaphysically necessary or something, but I don't think that that's what you mean. So depending on what modal scope you have in mind, the answer is probably no. I don't think that God is a necessary precondition for knowledge.
Okay, and just so I'm aware, because like I said, I'm not the best with terms, but with modal scope, you're talking about, like you said, metaphysical, logical, or epistemological.
Right. If we're saying that something is impossible, we mean it violates some sort of law, basically. And so to be logically impossible means you're violating law of non-contradiction. To be physically impossible is to be violating the law of gravity or something, second law of thermodynamics. It's what sort of laws are being violated, basically. And of course, the broadest class of that is going to be logical laws. But, some people posit their metaphysical laws and things like that. But just modal scope is basically what sort of possibility are we talking about?
Right. So there's two ways to attack the justificatory theories. One of them is to kind of just go through them all. And like you said, we would probably share similar arguments in attacking them, right? And showing why they ultimately fail. Another way to do it is to kind of show, are you familiar with the ideas of like first order and second order knowledge statements?
Mm-hmm.
So in the Reason for Reason paper, which I get a lot of my argument from, is a paper that Father Deacon Ananias wrote. It's on his website. What is it? patristicfaith.com? Yeah, patristicfaith.com. If anybody wants to read it, it's a good paper. It's pretty short too. He lays out this argument here about first and second order, and I'm going to read it. Totally stolen from his paper. So thank you, FDI. If it is true that knowledge exists, first order, then our beliefs and statements that knowledge exists is also true. The first order must be affirmed if we are to affirm the second order. However, any affirmation or statement about the first order is a second order statement. Therefore, one can never affirm the first order statement because one is always making second order statements. Therefore, autonomous man cannot establish if knowledge exists. And I'll actually post that in the private chat here because I don't know if you've heard that before, just so I like to have arguments right in front of me to follow. And they're easier that way. And so this kind of ignores and almost grants first order knowledge. So all the justificatory theories are kind of just granted in those first statements. So like we could talk about them. But I think ultimately this is probably the strongest way to deal with them.
And this is supposed to be like just a general argument against sort of any
epistemology that would not have God as a necessary precondition for knowledge.
Sorry, I'm just reading it over to make
Yeah,
sure.
no, totally. Take your time. I kind of, when I pasted it, it just morphed it all together too, which is hard to separate the premises sometimes.
Yeah, I'm not completely sure I would agree with what I think is the second premise here, that the first order must be affirmed if we are to affirm the second order. But I would probably want to give that more thought before debating this particular argument here with you.
Yeah.
But if you want to kind of put it out there in, layman's terms, I mean, I can try to work with you here.
Yeah, and I can try to do that. We'll see if I'm successful. So a first order statement, something like the tree exists, right? There's an assumption in there that you're saying, I know the tree exists. The second order statement, it's, I don't like, it's not necessary to get like into the KK principle. But it's, you could say, I know the tree exists, or you could just like, I assert that I know the tree exists, right? Because it's just a belief or a statement about the first order claim. So it seems to me that whenever you make a first order statement, you're also saying implicitly that knowledge exists, right? That knowledge exists. So it's a second order statement implicitly. But whenever you make a second order claim of how you know this particular thing, how do you know that the tree exists, or when you assert that you know that the tree exists, you're assuming that the tree exists. So you're assuming the first order statement is true when you make the second order claim. And when you make the first order claim, you're assuming the second order claim is true.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like the KK thesis a little bit, which, I mean, again, is pretty widely rejected by epistemologists, largely because it does seem to lead to an infinite regress. I mean, I don't accept the KK thesis. So, I mean, if the second premise of this argument is assuming the KK thesis, and I mean, we don't have to necessarily get into that debate if you don't want to over, whether the KK thesis is true. But yeah, if it does, then obviously that's probably going to be the premise that needs a defense.
Yeah, because I can grant the first order being true. So like, I can grant that someone can know something without knowing that they know for this argument.
Okay. Then how would you defend the second premise of this argument without the KK thesis?
Because so in order to affirm the first, or when we affirm the second order, I know that knowledge exists, right? Because saying I know about a first order claim, I know that knowledge exists. In order to affirm that second order, that first order claim that knowledge exists, right? A particular instance of knowledge, like the tree exists. If there are no particular instances of knowledge existing, then the second order wouldn't be true.
Okay, it sounds like you're just saying knowledge has to exist in order for you to know that knowledge exists, which, I mean, obviously I'm not going to disagree with that.
Yeah, so whenever someone affirms the second order statement, like when I ask about how they know a second order statement is true, they're going to give me a first order claim. And then if I ask about how that first order claim is true, they're also going to give me a second order claim, both which affirm each other. And this is kind of where epistemic circularity comes in.
Well, as long as you're not depending on one claim to justify the other, then I don't see that it's going to be circular.
But you are depending on it.
See, I don't see that, right? So let's take an example here. So something that I think that I know in the first order, right, is that I'm appeared to as though there is a book on the shelf over there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So say, how do I know that, right? I'm going to say by direct acquaintance with, that sense data right there. Now you can say, do you know that you know that? And I'll say yes, by direct acquaintance with, that fact that I have that thought in mind. And of course you could keep on asking, how do you know? Do you know? Do you know? Do you know? And I mean, it's always going to be an appeal to acquaintance there. I'm never going to be appealing to the proposition. So I don't see that there's any circularity involved there.
Yeah, I'm just looking at my notes here because I have an example So I have here, I'm going to read 2 paragraphs and I'll type them in here while I read them so you can follow me.
Sure.
I hate that it just groups it all together. Sorry about that. There's no way to format it in the side chat.
It's all right.
But empiricism is where the second one starts, just so you know. So knowledge exists, second order knowledge claim, can only be true if I know X. First order knowledge claim is true. However, we are inquiring into whether I know X is true. And all attempts to confirm I know X is true will involve knowledge exists. In other words, I can't get to I know X without knowledge exists, but knowledge exists is dependent upon I know X. Therefore, I never get to I know X. Then it lays it out with more specifics, which does kind of mess with the language, so we can talk about that. But empiricism, or an epistemic theory as a second order knowledge claim, can only be true if an instance of knowledge, I am holding a cup, first order knowledge claim, is true. In other words, sensory claims are actually knowledge. However, we are inquiring into whether I am holding a cup is true, or any sensory claim. And all attempts to confirm I am holding a cup is true will involve empiricism, second order. In other words, I can't get to I am holding a cup without empiricism. But empiricism is dependent upon I am holding a cup. Therefore, I never get to I am holding a cup. If I were to try to kind of put it into my own words, when you say I am holding a cup, you're assuming that empiricism, or a form of epistemic theory that holds to direct sensory input as knowledge, is true. But then when I ask you how you know that you're holding the cup, and you give me this epistemic theory about it, that epistemic theory is only true if the instances of knowledge, particularly in this case, that you're holding a cup, is also true. So they do depend on each other.
Yeah, I don't think I agree with that, actually, because, well, maybe we need to be a little clear on what we mean by the theory. We mean the entire theory, or we mean like one postulate of the theory?
What would be the distinction there?
So, like, for example, I hold to a classical foundationalist epistemology, right? One aspect of this is like one postulate of this is that there are acquaintance relations, for example, that account for how we have non-inferential knowledge of things. That could be the case, right? That one postulate without the entire theory being true. But I'm wondering if maybe you would restrict this and just try to say that the postulate has to, I mean, it doesn't really even have to be true, right? But it has to exist in order for the theory to be true.
So the postulate is what again?
So the postulate in this case is that there are acquaintance relations.
Yeah, and that can't exist in a vacuum.
Sure. I mean, that's fine. It requires like a mind to exist and something for the mind to be acquainted with.
Yeah, and I mean, if that's all you have in your epistemic theory, that itself could be an epistemic theory.
Yeah, well, that's not really a fully fleshed out theory. It's a part of the theory.
Yeah, so I would say then even the postulate would still be a second order claim, and that it would do the same thing in this argument.
Okay, so let's say I think that acquaintance relations exist. What is the objection here?
Well, in order to justify that claim, so you thinking that how'd you put it? What was the term?
That an acquaintance relation exists.
That's just direct like experience, right?
Yeah, I mean, experience would be a type of, it would be an example of it.
Okay, I was just unfamiliar with the terms, that's why I asked. So in order to justify that as, like, are you saying that gives you knowledge?
Acquaintance, well, so one instance of it won't, but I specifically hold to Fumerton's version of this, where you have 3 distinct acquaintance relations. And so when you have those 3, which I don't know how detailed you want me to get here, but basically, let me back up a sec. The components of knowledge, right? You have a truth bearer, right? That's a proposition, or your thought, your belief. You have a truth maker. That's the thing that makes it true. And then you have a correspondence relation between those, assuming the correspondence theory of truth. I would say you need acquaintance with all 3 of those elements. So if you have acquaintance with all 3 of the ingredients of truth, then you have knowledge. So yes, acquaintance gives you knowledge if you have all three of those criteria satisfied. Sorry if that was
Okay.
a mouthful, but that's
fine.
That's the basic theory.
So how does it escape then? Like, how is that not reliant on a first order claim?
Well, because I'm relying on a relation, not a claim, right? It's the relations that are doing the justifying work here.
So what is then something you can know based on this?
I mean, the example that I gave before will do fine. That, I'm appeared to as though there's a book on the shelf over there.
Right. So if there were no examples of that, if you actually couldn't know anything with this theory, would the theory be true?
If I
wasn't, and again, I'm not saying it's a full-fledged theory, but
yeah. It would be true that the theory was capable, like in principle, like there wouldn't be a problem with the theory. It would just be it wouldn't obtain in reality if I wasn't actually acquainted with any facts.
It kind of seems like you're using logic separated from everything else, like metaphysics.
Meaning, what exactly do you mean by that when you say it's separated from everything else?
So maybe I'm not being clear. When you say that you can have this theory of knowledge, say, or postulate within a theory of knowledge be true, without it mapping onto reality, it kind of seems like you're not like playing a game in a derogatory sense, but it seems like you're like as an allegory, playing a chess game without chess pieces. Like you're playing a logic game in a vacuum.
Well, I mean, I don't think I am doing that in fact, because I think I do have acquaintance relations. The point I was making there was just, I think this would be a workable like theory of knowledge. I think it would be bulletproof, even if, it didn't turn out to be the case that people were actually acquainted with facts, right? I wouldn't be able to use it, right? But like in theory, it would still be a working theory of knowledge. Like I don't think it succumbs to any like internal problem, was basically what I was saying.
So how would you know this theory is true then? This postulate?
Are you saying in the hypothetical where I don't
actually have... in the hypothetical.
I probably wouldn't be able to within the hypothetical.
Right. So that then wouldn't satisfy that knowledge is possible.
Within the it wouldn't establish that it's actual. Within the hypothetical, I would agree with you. But
right.
In the hypothetical, I mean, it's unclear that I'd be able to know anything, right?
Right. And now, as a foundationalist, wouldn't you agree that that's kind of self-defeating?
How so?
Like not being able to have knowledge?
If you're actually in a world where you can't have knowledge. So well, say you're in a world where there is no knowledge, and somebody says, "I know that there's no knowledge," or you don't even have to be in a world where there's no knowledge. Just saying, "I know that there is no knowledge," yes, that's a self-defeating claim.
Right, and so that's especially like, and we can talk about possible worlds and all of that. I'm not the best on that, but I'm definitely willing to talk about it. I understand some of it.
I don't know that we need to for the purposes of this conversation.
Okay. But for this world that we live in, we assume that knowledge is true. Both of it. Like we can't even have this discourse without knowledge being true, or like knowledge being possible.
So let's take a step back and say what exactly we mean when we say that we assume that, right? Because like there's things that I assume in the context of a debate, right? Like that we're both going to be speaking English, right? Or if I'm going to debate a Calvinist, I'm going to assume that we're both going to accept the authority of the Bible, right? There are things that I will assume for the sake of a conversation, but I feel like that's not what you mean. I feel like you mean that like we actually have to take this for granted and that it's not something that like, even if called upon to justify it, we could. That I don't agree with, right? Like I think it's perfectly justifiable, the proposition that knowledge exists.
Yeah, so I guess what I meant by assume is just that you can't justify the claim that knowledge doesn't exist.
But well, sure, yeah, that's not the claim that I or I think anyone else is making, though.
not here, but you'd be surprised with
people will say stupid things in the context of it. But outside of like true global skeptics, I don't think there's anyone who like in their innermost self, like when they're not under pressure to perform, is gonna say that knowledge is impossible or doesn't exist.
Right, and that's why like you agreed with the second premise in the first syllogism some people try to attack it very silly too. And that's what I'm saying here is that, especially in this world, again, possible worlds we could get into, but in this world, there's you can't deny that knowledge exists. Every attempt to do so is self-defeating at minimum, in maximum a contradiction.
I don't think it is a contradiction, but I agree with you that it is self-defeating.
Okay, cool. And maybe it seems like I could learn a lot from you just in general about philosophy. So maybe we can talk about the difference there between self-defeating and a contradiction with that statement another time. But yeah, so what were we talking about then around that
well, I mean, you have been going through various different syllogisms, which I think were from Father Deacon's papers.
Yeah. The only one that wasn't was the third one.
I have 2 here in the chat.
Yeah, 2. So I gave 3. I didn't paste the first 3 I gave because those are the ones I used in that debate against Jed that you had. We had a quick conversation about the other day.
Yeah.
So I figured you had those 3. But the third one was
that the one about reason not being able to justify itself without circle?
Right. So, yeah, that one's not FDA's.
Yeah.
I just don't want to say anything is his that's not. So
I want to raise a concern about this one, and I know you're having a conversation with Alex Malpass at some point. I discussed about a week, with him. He thought this was a nitpick that I had with your argument, but I'm putting it out there anyway, just to see what you make of it. You talk about reason justifying reason. A concern I have with this is that reason's not a proposition, right? Like, reason is the process of making inferences. So because it's not propositional, it's not the sort of thing that can, in principle, be justified. So it seems odd to me to classify autonomous epistemology as the thesis that reason can justify itself or has to justify itself. I'm not completely sure what I'm supposed to be justifying there. I presume like something like reason is reliable or trustworthy, something like that. But like reason itself doesn't need a justification. So
would it make sense then to say the ability to reason?
Abilities don't need justification though. Like I don't justify walking or swimming or sneezing, these aren't propositions, because to justify something means you're giving some reason to think that it's true. But running isn't true and sneezing isn't true. It's like abilities are not true or false.
What was your definition of reason again?
The process of making inferences.
The process of making inferences. So that process itself, you're saying doesn't need to be justified?
Right. Now, I think maybe what you want to say is that reason is trustworthy or that reason is reliable, right? That would be a proposition.
Okay.
I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth.
No, and it's tough to write, like especially with syllogisms.
No, I got
stuff
you.
on the spot.
Definitely, people nitpick mine all the time, so I get it.
That's the only syllogism I came up with myself. So it's out of all of them, that one is probably the most problematic.
To me, it wasn't completely clear because, like, when someone says justify this, I'm thinking something that can be true or false, like a proposition that then you're asking me for a reason to think it's true. So when someone, and I mean, I did a video on this. I know you did a tag team debate with Saitin Brug and Kate. I kind of actually used him as my foil in that particular video, but I kind of went in on this that it's not.
You did a review of it or a video based on it?
Yeah, I began by playing some of his clips from his How to Answer the Fool film, and where he's asking people like, to make this claim, you're depending on your reason, right? And they're like, yes. How do you know that your reasoning is valid? And I kind of went in on that on why I don't think it's a particularly well framed question, but it gets rhetorical points because most people have never actually thought about it. So that was kind of the gist of the video. Again, I don't want to make a big deal out of this point either. It's just a concern. I'm not quite sure what I'm supposed to be justifying when you say that autonomous epistemology, you want me to justify reason without, using reason. I'm just thinking it's not the sort of thing, it's not truth apt, as philosophers would say. It's not the sort of thing that can be justified.
Yeah, and maybe I have to scrap it and get a new syllogism, or maybe I just have to figure out a better way to frame what you just said about reason. But I do think that the syllogism, the first one in the private chat I gave you, could be could replace that one, and it would work then.
Yeah, that's fine. I do want to give that one more thought, but my initial concern is about the second premise of that one, which I mean, again, we already discussed the KK thesis.
Yeah,
but it looks to me like the second premise of that argument is going to depend on the very controversial KK thesis.
Yeah, and so that's another thing that in Father Deacon Ananias's paper, he actually says this. I'll just read it verbatim. Furthermore, these distinctions are not to be confused with the familiar issues in epistemology concerning what is called the KK thesis. In pointing this out, we avoid the whole debate between internalism, and externalism et al. We can grant that it is possible that a person S knows that P, and if they know that P, then it is also possible for S to have the second order knowledge that they know that they know. In other words, we acknowledge that first order knowledge is not contingent upon second order knowledge, but rather the other way around. However, our question and concern are not about knowing particular propositions, but about knowledge in general, and how it is possible to ground and justify the existence of knowledge, which is a second order issue. I know I just threw all that out at you, so.
Yeah, I mean, I think my answer there is going to be appealing to the general point that I made earlier, that I'm going to appeal fundamentally to an acquaintance relation to justify my belief that knowledge is real. I'm not going to be appealing to the same proposition to justify itself. I'm appealing to something fundamentally non-propositional in the final analysis. And
I would say that directly you aren't, right? But it's almost like, what do you think of like a contradiction by entailment?
I mean, I think that that's going to show that something's necessarily false.
Right. So it's like, it's not that someone, because rarely does somebody affirm P and affirm not P, right? Like that.
Or at least not that explicitly.
Yeah. So it usually needs to be teased out. And a lot of times, or at least within the discussions I have, it's usually like a contradiction by entailment, right?
Yeah. I mean, obviously I've had those as well, where, I try to work somebody along to get them to see that something is in conflict. So no, I mean, it's legitimate. I'm not disputing that.
So I think it's in a similar sense, an implicit, hopefully I'm using that word right, assumption of the first order claim being true, which is why we talked about, like, in the hypothetical, if this theory could be true without mapping onto reality, or maybe there's a better way to phrase that. And I just don't like, you're not affirming it. You're not directly pointing back to the first order claim, but implicitly assuming the first order claim is true when you say it, when you say that the postulate of the theory is true.
Yeah, I don't actually see how at all, because at no point am I appealing to that claim to justify it.
But when I said in the hypothetical world that in order to say that this postulate of the epistemic theory is true, it would need to map onto reality.
Yeah, that's fine, but we aren't in the hypothetical world, so like in point of fact, I don't see that I'm doing anything objectionable. It's just like, so hypothetically, I would be if I were in that situation and I made that claim.
So then, making the claim in this world, you're assuming that it maps onto reality.
It's not an assumption, though. It's known by direct acquaintance with all truth conditions.
Okay, and maybe I'm using the word assume there wrongly. But that's kind of the point, is that you have to take the first order claim as true when you make this, how do you say it? When you say this postulate, when you postulate this theory, or this particular of the theory.
Well, which particular claim? So we're saying that I have to take for granted that acquaintance relations exist in order to say that acquaintance relations exist?
No, that you have to, there has to be a case in which you know something based on acquaintance relations in order for you to say that acquaintance relations give you knowledge.
Yeah, that's fine.
So that's the second order, implicitly assuming, and I'm not saying like assuming without justification, but I'm saying like it's implicit that the first order is affirmed. Maybe that's a better way to say it. You're affirming the first order when you make the second order claim.
Sure, the proposition that acquaintance relations exist is going to have to be true in order for me to know that it is true. I'm fine with that, but I don't see that there's anything objectionable or circular about that.
But when asking that, like a particular instance of the first order claim that there appears to be a book in front of you, when asking how do you know that's true, when you say based on by acquaintance, then you're affirming the first order within the second order claim.
How so?
Because you're affirming that, like, by saying that the second order claim is true, we've already established that you have to affirm the first order claim.
It just sounds like you're saying that, again, we're getting back to kind of the KK thesis, infinite regress. That yes, you can continue asking the question of how do you know that and that and that and that. But I mean, at each level, I'm appealing to an acquaintance relation. So sure, maybe it has to be true, but I'm not appealing to it. So there's no circularity. That's, I guess, the point that I'm pushing. So the point that I'm trying to reaffirm.
What I'm trying to do here is not get you to an infinite regress in the sense of, like, so first order claim, the tree exists. Second order claim, I know that the tree exists. Right, which is really, I know that the tree exists. First order, I know the tree exists. Second order, and then like third order would be I know that I know that I know, and this would be the infinite regress, right? Fourth order, fifth order, all the way to infinity. Right. I'm not trying to go there. What I'm trying to point out is that it's a bounce from 1 to 2, back to 1, back to 2, back to 1, back to 2.
You talking in terms of the dialectic or in terms of the justification?
Just whenever you're affirming these statements.
Because, I mean, affirmation of 1, so the proposition affirmed in 1 is not doing any work. It's not doing any justifying work in justifying premise 2. It has to be true in order for the second proposition to be true, right? So I agree with that. But nothing, it seems to me nothing objectionable is going to follow from this unless you're saying that premise 1 is playing some justificatory work in me being justified in, affirming the second proposition, because then there's going to be a circularity issue.
Well, when you say that there appears to be a book in front of you,
yeah,
in order for that to be true, acquaintance relations must be true, or this particular postulate of it.
Yeah.
And that's where I see the back and forth in the circularity.
Maybe I'm just not seeing it, but we might be hitting an impasse here. And okay. I know we're coming up on an hour, and I do want to push you on some things if that's okay.
Yeah. And then, if you want to do that, and then maybe I have some pushback on foundationalism in general. So maybe after you do that, we can go back to that.
I would say I think you hold to a version of foundationalism, if I'm not.
I've heard. So I used to affirm that when I was a Calvinist. And this is where, like I said, I was kind of disappointed in the literature. And maybe it's just because I wasn't exposed to all of the literature. But amongst Reformed presuppositionalists, there wasn't like a lot of these issues I couldn't find answers for. So I kind of had to just make it up on my own. And that led me to, it's almost like when you, within your line of work, I'm sure like if there's a new hire, they may have bad habits and you're like, I wish they knew nothing instead of knowing these bad habits, because it's way harder to get these bad habits out of people than if they just were a blank slate. So that's kind of like, I still have some of that baggage where I made up things on my own that just weren't true. And one of them was kind of foundationalism. I was like, oh yeah, tag is just like a different form of foundationalism. But talking or reading papers from Father Deacon Ananias, talking to him a little bit, it's almost as if there's not really a particular epistemic theory that's being held to. But tag is more talking about, is meta-epistemic a better word?
But there are meta-foundationalist theories as well. So okay. I guess, as I understand it, foundationalism is basically, it's just the thesis, or it can be boiled down to the thesis that there are non-inferentially justified beliefs. It seems to me the presuppositionalist says yes, but belief in God or the Christian God or the Orthodox God or the Bible, something like that, that's the only acceptable non-inferentially justified belief. So given that very minimalist definition of foundationalism, it does seem to me that presuppositionalism is a very particular type of foundationalism, if that makes sense.
Okay. And, I'll you're more studied on those particular terms and ideas than I am. So this is something that I will go back and take a deeper look at. So I appreciate
Sure,
that.
and I'm really not trying to put you into a box here. That's just
No,
been the
yeah.
perception of it to me.
Totally understandable. And a lot of this conversation, I'm going to go back and take a look at and hopefully understand my position and your position better. So thank you.
Okay, yeah, no worries. So before I kind of get into, I guess, the first real question I want to hit you with, have I understood you correctly that we both kind of want to wholesale reject circular reasoning, both in its logical and epistemic form?
So this is where I kind of butchered that conversation with you the other night.
Okay.
Because Father Deacon Ananias actually says this, and I knew this. Not that I thought you were trying to get me, but I haven't talked to you. So, and I'm usually in very adversarial relationships with people I discuss and debate with.
I get it.
So forgive me, but so I'm always like, dude, I've dealt with some nasty atheists, and
I have to.
so that's like where my mind instantly goes, and I'm like, not that I even assumed that about you. It's just like a habit, but it's so I think that like FDA says we're not circle phobes, right? And that's just like a funny way of him putting it. But I do think that there is going to be some form of circularity at the meta epistemic level, if I'm putting that correctly. And that's where the distinction of vicious and virtuous circularity comes into play. And I'm not sure if I fully understand the complete distinctions, but it seems like you kind of see a distinction as well.
I'm very unclear on what the vicious versus virtuous distinction is supposed to be. I know John Frame tries to make it. I have pored over John Frame's works. I have struggled to understand what he thinks it is. This is going to sound super uncharitable, but the best I have been able to find is that virtuous circularity means it's circularity when the presuppositionalist does it. I mean, it looks like textbook special pleading to me. I don't want to think that that's true, but I have made a concerted effort to try to understand the virtuous versus vicious distinction. I have failed to find anything that does not reduce to special pleading.
So it is interesting that you say that, because I only ever heard it brought up in presuppositional circles for, no pun intended, for a long time because it's funny how like arguments work and they progress and there's like an ebb and flow. And when I first started studying this, the objections were terrible. And now there are like very well thought out objections, and some of them are very tough to deal with. Malpass has a whole 20 articles I'm reading through in preparation for my discussion with him. Those are not the objections you hear on in most debates on tag. So with that being said, I did start to hear atheists make the distinction, which was interesting to me because I only ever heard it in the presuppositional circles. But then there are like, and I really should have read through them more, but there are like articles on SEP that make the distinction, and not from a presuppositionalist, but like from just epistemologists.
Are they making it between virtuous and vicious, or are they making it between like malignant versus benign? That's typically
so
where
that's where what the language I was seeing.
Okay, yes, because in philosophy, there is a distinction between malignant versus benign epistemic circularity. I have argued myself in the past that there's not a legitimate distinction between those two things. Honestly, for similar reasons that I argue that I don't think there's a legitimate one between virtuous and vicious. What I can say for people like Michael Bergman, who have probably done the most work to actually defend that there is a real distinction there. And again, I don't want to sound like I'm hating on the presuppositionalists too hard, but he gave me something tangible to work with there that I just never got from the presuppositionalists. Now, if y'all just want to say like it's the malignant versus benign epistemic circularity distinction, cool with that. A concern I'm going to have is that I don't see why, if you're going to say that what you're appealing to is benign epistemic circularity, I don't see why the atheists or whoever you're arguing with isn't going to be able to make the same move. So that's going to kind of be the concern that I have there.
Yeah, and so the way that I understand foundationalism is that there are foundational beliefs that there are no further justification for. Is that generally how you would put it?
So the way I typically describe it is foundationalism is the idea that beliefs come in one of two types, and these are going to be inferential, which are going to be beliefs known on the basis of an inference, but ultimately those go down to non-inferential beliefs. So those are the two categories: inferential and non-inferential beliefs. That's basic foundationalism. Like, if you affirm that, you're kind of a foundationalist. Now, most philosophers are foundationalists, but they've got huge disagreements over particularly the nature of those non-inferential beliefs. So some of them, yes, will take the position to just be like, yeah, those ones are unjustified, right? That's planting his position. That's Bergman. Well, I got to be careful with Bergman because he does think that they're justified, but he means something completely different by the term. A lot of people will just say, yes, those ones aren't justified. I'm a classical foundationalist. I don't say that. So I say no beliefs get a free pass. Even the most basic beliefs, they have to be justified, but they won't be justified by inference. They won't be justified by further beliefs. And that's the role that acquaintance is serving in my epistemology. I'm saying the most foundational beliefs are fundamentally justified by a relation in the end. They aren't justified by further beliefs. Sorry, I know that was a lot. Does that kind of make sense?
I think I understand. So you're not justifying it based on a further belief, you said, but rather the relation to another foundational belief?
No, just the relation to the fact.
Relation to the fact.
More specifically, the fact, the belief, and the correspondence between the two, that sort of triple acquaintance theory I laid out before. But to keep it simple, yes, acquaintance with the fact.
So you can't, and I'm not trying to just twist it and put it back on foundationalism here.
I got
the reason I brought it up was because I was trying to understand if you're saying like circularity is okay, like, and that's why foundationalism is okay. And so that's like kind of where I was trying to understand. But
so let's
go back to foundationalism after, but finish what you were saying.
Yeah, sorry. I'm of the very rare opinion these days that like absolutely no circularity. Like we don't do epistemic, we don't do logical, we don't do benign versus malignant. Like I say it's all bad. But most people, particularly presuppositionalists, they were actually the people I first started encountering this claim from, that like all reasoning is ultimately circular. Of course, I disagree with them on that front. I've argued that way in the past, and I'm happy to have that argument. But I kind of just found it maybe a little easier at this point to be like, if you accept circularity in the final analysis, I mean, make all the distinctions you want, that's fine. I don't see why you're going to object then to the atheist doing that.
Yeah. And so this is the way Father Deacon Ananias explains it in his paper. And the reason I didn't bring it up right away is because, like I said, I'm not like, this is his words. And I don't know if I don't want to talk about something necessarily unless I fully understand it, but let's just see what I would like to hear what you say about this, at least. There is not a problem with circularity per se. So, let me give it to you because it's easier to follow along, and I'll read it for everybody to hear. There is not a problem with circularity per se, since words will be employed to give an account of words and semantics, arguments will be used to discuss other arguments, and philosophical paradigms will be self-referential. The problem occurs when we attempt to use or inevitably invoke circularity as a means to justify something when it is unable to provide a justification. In other words, circularity is only problematic vicious when it cannot accomplish what it sets out to do. That is, would I not copy the full thing? That is, oh, it must have limited me. That is, provide a sufficient reason or justification for knowledge.
Yeah, I mean, I think I generally agree with this here. I think my issue with presuppositionalism is going to be that, yeah, you have the problem that it stated here.
Okay.
And maybe I can just hit you with the question that, was kind of what the whole question about circularity was leading up to, was basically going to be the question, at the bottommost level, you appeal to God's revelation to justify beliefs, right?
Right.
So,
well, when you say bottommost, I would say we start with God's revelation.
That's fine. Starting point,
Okay.
bottommost. I think probably that's synonymous. But in the final appeal is to God's revelation, right?
Okay.
So you agree with that. So the question then would be, how do you know, that it comes from God or that it's true, right? Would you just say because that is also revealed?
No, I would say that's where the impossibility of the contrary would come into play.
And why is, sorry to go back to modal scopes, but is this logically impossible?
Both, yeah, I would say logically and metaphysically.
Okay, well, yeah, because whatever is logically impossible is presumably also metaphysically impossible. But because logical possibilities the broadest modal scope. But then, okay, so to be logically impossible, you agree it has to have a logical contradiction?
Yes.
What would the logical contradiction be in the proposition that I can know things and God does not exist?
Right. So this is where the contradiction by entailment that we were talking about earlier, which I'm glad I was using the right term because I had to, what's a good term for this? So the contradiction by entailment is knowledge exists, but then the entailment of the epistemic theory is that knowledge doesn't exist because they can't justify that the phrase knowledge exists. Now, maybe you're like, okay, well, I have this classical foundationalist approach that can be used without God, and that can give us knowledge. And maybe we'd have to talk about that further. But like I said, like you said at the beginning, I don't want to just flip it back onto you. But this is kind of how the argument works, right? And so it's like, for example, with empiricism, my debate with Craig that you said you watched.
Yeah.
So like that's usually how my discussion with an empiricist goes, especially someone who's not very philosophically inclined. Not to say that I am, but Craig was definitely not. And so it's like, well, all right, what do you know? I know that I'm holding a cup. How do you know that you're holding a cup? I know that I'm holding a cup because I'm holding the cup, right? My senses are reliable. How do you know your senses are reliable? Well, because they've always been reliable, right? This circularity creates a contradiction by entailment.
And you're saying but you'd have to say any possible alternative epistemology is gonna fail to get you to knowledge.
Anyone that says God is not a necessary precondition for knowledge,
correct?
Which I don't know if it's limited to just presup in that sense.
Well, that's kind of what I just mean by presuppositional.
Okay.
Epistemology. I just kind of mean I'm using that as shorthand for any theory of knowledge that says you have to presuppose God, the Bible, Christian theism, something like that.
Yeah. And so whenever like do you think, this is kind of a side note, but it's fun to get other people's opinions on it. Atheism is, whether or not it's a worldview, it's an adjective to describe a worldview, right?
Yeah, it'll be a component of a worldview.
Right. So like, do you know atheists who just get so up in arms? Like, atheism isn't a worldview?
Yeah. I mean, technically they're right, but it's like the ones who want to fight over whether the definition of atheist is lack of belief. And it's like,
yeah,
I don't really care what term we use, but that definition doesn't actually make a lot of sense.
Yeah, cool. All right. So and that's why the reason I say this, because any atheistic or agnostic worldview that puts forward an epistemology without God, it would fall under this category. And so especially when in a debate, does God exist? Well, any worldview that may postulate God in some way that would also be considered autonomous epistemology isn't in the realm of discussion for the debate prompt because, well, you would just lose the debate, right? So usually I'm dealing with all epistemic theories that don't start with God or lead to God.
Okay, so I think I would have three basic lines of objection then to saying that this is going to be justified by the impossibility of the contrary. Particularly now that we've sort of specified the modal scope that's at play there. So the first one is just I straightforwardly think that I have an epistemology of classical foundationalism that secures knowledge and is not a presuppositionalist epistemology by any means. That's typically the route that I have gone down. I'm happy to go down that route again, but I was kind of looking to maybe push another one in the context of this conversation.
Let's do that. We'll not go down foundationalism. We can save that. What are you at for time right now? How is?
I mean, I was saying that we've been live for an hour and 10 minutes. I can probably do another 50 minutes, and then after that, I should probably get back to my wife. But we can cut it off before then if you want to.
So far, guys, we have about 6 or 7 questions. So, do you want to keep going back and forth, or do you want to move towards audience questions?
Yeah, I was gonna say maybe do this for another 20-ish minutes and then go to questions.
Cool.
Okay.
All right. So
sounds good.
Real quick before you get to your next question, would you agree then that all other epistemic theories besides this classical foundationalism wouldn't work in this situation?
Yeah, but at least all the other ones I'm aware of. But it seems to me you're making quite a bit stronger claim than that, right? Like, I'm not going to say that there isn't another one out there that I might have to, like, there's one out there called phenomenal conservatism, right? That I don't myself subscribe to, but there is a way I could actually incorporate that into mine, like if my objections to it were ever answered. I don't think that that's going to happen, but I know I'm not omniscient.
It seems pretty weak to me, but we could talk about that another time.
Same here, right?
Yeah.
Hypothetically, right, these idea that seemings confer non-inferential justification, I could actually say acquaintance relations and seemings are both sources of basic knowledge, right? So that would actually work with my theory. I could hybridize that with my theory very easily. I just don't at this time have reason to do so. I just bring that up to say, I don't know everything, right? And even if every exists, and this kind of gets into one of my further objections, I think, to your position, which would be even if all extant theories, including my own, right, weren't able to get you to knowledge, that doesn't actually justify the strong modal claim that it's literally going to be contradictory to do that, right? I mean, even if no one has done it, if we haven't actually shown the contradiction, like showing it in individual examples does not actually justify the claim that all possible examples of this are going to yield a contradiction. And I know that feels like I'm putting a lot on you, but that is in fact the very strong claim you made, is that it, like, to say it's the impossibility of the contrary actually has to be impossible. And the standard in this case is logical contradiction.
So that's why I like when within the disjunct, it's either God is a necessary precondition for the possibility of knowledge, or he's not. Anytime that you say he's not, you're stuck in the circle of first and second order knowledge claims. That's where the argument tries to group everything, all of these other worldviews that are not God, right, into one bucket, and then refute that bucket.
Could you explain to me why you think the presuppositionalist is not in? I mean, I've already explained to you why I don't think that I'm caught in that first, second order, circular cycle. Could you explain to me why you think that you're not, just so I can see what sort of answer you're looking for?
Yeah, so it would be that God's revelation independently justifies the first and second order claims.
So I'm saying acquaintance independently justifies both first and second knowledge claims, right? So first and second order knowledge claims, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if the whole argument is just that, like, you need a single source to be able to justify both of these things, it seems like it's pretty easy to fill that condition without specifically appealing to God's revelation. Like, maybe that's a way to square the circle, but like, I think I've got a way to do that. I can hypothetically think of other ways to do that. I guess I don't feel like we've gotten anything out of that that's going to indicate a contradiction in any other attempt besides God's revelation to square that circle.
Yeah, so I think that this acquaintance relations, and this is probably something I have to think about more, but it seems that this acquaintance relation when you try to justify it, what are you going to do?
I'm going to say acquaintance, or I'm going to say relations aren't propositional entities, and so it's a category error to ask for justification for non-propositional entities.
So do you know that acquaintance relation is true?
The proposition that
knowledge?
acquaintance relations exist, yes, I know that to be true. In virtue,
and how would you justify that proposition?
In virtue of an acquaintance relation.
So that seems to me to be the circle. Now, you might say, well, you have the same circle, right?
I'm just going to deny it's a circle because I'm not appealing to the proposition to justify the proposition. I'm appealing to the relation to justify the proposition.
Yeah, but that's still a proposition.
The relation is a proposition?
No, you saying I'm appealing to the relations.
Sure, I have to express it in a statement, but what is actually doing the justifying work is the relation of acquaintance. It's not my statement.
So, but when you say relation, are you just saying basically coherence?
No, well, so I mean, coherent relations are a type of relation, but acquaintance relations are thought to be like a direct relation of awareness between a mind and an object. An example I give here, just to kind of give people an idea of what I'm talking about, is just say you get like a splitting headache, right? There aren't like any investigations or inferential steps that you have to undertake to determine that you have a headache, right? You're just kind of mentally confronted with that fact. That sort of direct, unmediated relation that you would bear to your pain in that case, that's what I'm talking about by an acquaintance relation. And you can kind of extrapolate that to pretty much any other type of sense data, your own ideas, your own concepts, and so on and so forth.
Right. And so I guess the question then would be, how do you know that your relations are true? Like, how do you know that they're mapped onto reality? I don't know if that's the best way to put it.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, relations aren't true, but is the question, how do you know that
like you're direct,
that they're like revealing physical reality to you?
Yeah, like when you say I have a headache, could you be wrong about that?
No.
Why not?
Because I'm directly acquainted with all truth conditions.
So anything you experience is a true experience.
Experiences also are not true things, but do you mean a veridical experience? So
like you could see
hallucinatory?
Yeah, so like you could hallucinate.
Correct.
And you
right. So what I would say is that the certainty there is only going to extend to the sense data, right? So in the case of a hallucination or a dream, you can be certain that you are appeared to in this way. You're going to have to make an inference to get beyond that, to that there's a substantial reality beyond the phenomena that you're experiencing.
So then how would that, if it relies on sense data, wouldn't the next question be, how do you know that your senses are reliable?
Yeah, and I would say inference to the best explanation, sort of along the lines that philosophers like Tim McGrew and Kevin McCain give, where they argue that like inference principles, or laws of logic would probably be a term that you'd be more familiar with, that these are analytic propositions, so they're known a priori. I also have an explanation for how acquaintance plays a role there, but we probably don't have to get into that here. So given that these inference rules can be known a priori without depending on any sensory inputs, then you can make an inference to the best explanation, because we independently know with certainty that inference to the best explanation is a truth-preserving mode of inference. And so then I just argue that a physical world is the best explanation for why I have these particular sensory inputs. That's how I get from sense data. That's how I bridge the gap, I should say, from sense data to a physical world.
Right. So I guess if you're relying then on the example of a law of logic being a priori knowledge, that's like kind of a foundational belief, is what you're saying, that it's not justified. All right. So
given my epistemology, it would have to be too, because if you tried to get there by inference, that would be circular.
Right, because you're assuming in order to make inferences, the law of non-contradiction has to be true.
Right, you assume inference rules to make inferences.
Right, okay. So now the problem here then, I think, is I don't see how you can hold to the laws of non-contradiction the law of non-contradiction if there is no God.
Yeah, and is this because I heard a debate you had with another gentleman about this earlier today. Is it fair to say that you're basically making argument from logic that, you know, laws of logic are propositions, and propositions seem an awful lot like thoughts, and because these are necessary propositions, they have to exist in a necessary mind, i.e. God? Is that the basic argument there?
Yeah, and I don't even know if, and like orthodoxy, actually, I don't know how much you've researched into orthodoxy, but at least, you know, reading the Orthodox saints, especially the more philosophically minded ones, there's really interesting stuff there, and I'm not going to pretend to understand it right now. But I mean, like with the essence energies distinction and the logoi, like there's a ton. I'm not going to get into that. But what I'm saying is that I don't know that in the Christian worldview, logic are just laws of logic are just propositions in the mind of God. But it seems like if you're not assuming God, you're not assuming the Christian worldview, then that's all they can really be.
Well, so I have a question then as to sort of what you think logic is. Before I get to that, let me just preface it by saying, so far as I know, the most sort of sophisticated formulation of the argument from logic is from James Anderson and Greg Welty in their, I think it's a 2009 paper called The Lord of Non-Contradiction, an argument for God from logic. And as they formulate it, like it defends very heavily on the idea that laws of logic are one, propositions, and then two, necessary propositions. Propositions are thoughts, and so, you know, necessary thoughts equal necessary mind. That's how they get there. So if that's not the argument you're making, I guess I'm just going to kind of back up and say, okay, what do you think the laws of logic are, if not propositions?
Yeah, and again, I'm not equipped to really go into that. But if we assume for the sake of the argument that that is the argument, that in the way I've heard it put, the way I've used it is that the laws of logic are conceptual, and that concepts are mind dependent, and they exist before human minds existed, and therefore there must be a mind upon which these concepts are dependent, and that would be God's mind. Okay,
so I did a video on this topic where I actually agree that I take the laws of logic to be propositions, and I agree that propositions are mental entities. Now, I don't think that I think they're necessarily true. I don't think that they're necessarily existent. We don't necessarily have to go down that down that road. I think let's just say I agree with you that like they are sort of necessary. Why think that they are conceptual, I suppose? Because, I mean, the main rival to like divine conceptualism or conceptualist nominalism, like I would hold to, is going to be Platonism, right? Where laws of logic sort of have a similar ontological status to God, but like they're not existing in a mind. They're not conscious agents. They just sort of exist in this ethereal realm of Platonic forms, right? You know, probably like a good 40-ish% of philosophers believe that that is what the laws of logic are. I think that that's a worse explanation than my conceptualist nominalism, but I don't think it's impossible. And it seems to me like your argument requires that Platonism's not even a possibility. I wouldn't even think that you could have access to these Platonic forms or how they would. Yeah. So that's one of my big objections, actually, to Platonism, is there's the epistemic access problem. A concern, though, and this is also an objection that I have to divine conceptualism, which is what I think that you're arguing for. It's certainly what James Anderson and Welty are arguing for in their paper, would be divine conceptualism. A concern with it is that it inherits a lot of the problems of Platonism, and I've argued that includes the epistemic access problem. If these are ideas in God's mind, as opposed to because I think they're ideas in our own mind. If they're ideas in our own mind, really easy to see how we can have epistemic access. If they're ideas in a divine mind, we can't have direct access. Well, I mean, you're Orthodox, so maybe with your essence energies distinction, you think we can directly access the mind of God. But at any rate, there's certainly a question there of how is it that we have direct access to the mind of God?
Yeah, I do not understand the essence energies distinction. I've only been inquiring for a few months, so that's why I'm not going to argue for it. But I do think that, and I could probably hook you up with somebody who is equipped for that conversation, because that's kind of like the main argument that these apologists will make against Protestantism and Catholicism. Obviously, there are other arguments, but from a positive account, the energies essence distinction, they'll say like there's a collapse that happens if you don't have the distinction. And like I can't argue for it. But
I mean, my roommate, my best friend, converted to Eastern Orthodoxy.
Oh, nice.
I think he became a catechumen about 3 years ago and was actually inducted like maybe a year and a half ago. Anyway, he sort of describes that distinction to me as just sort of, it's like the distinction between God and what God does. I was like, I don't know how that's controversial. Like, doesn't everyone acknowledge a distinction between agents and their actions? Maybe he's describing it badly because, again, he's pretty new to it. But if he's correct, then I don't see sort of what that would have to do with this. But I mean, you are correct that it's seemingly a lot of Orthodox folks understand it a little differently. Even so, like I could grant it to you. Maybe you have this solution to the epistemic access problem via the energies essence distinction. I could hypothetically grant that. I still don't see that Platonism is impossible here, right? Like maybe you've got the better account. Maybe you've got a better theory on offer.
Well, the impossibility all comes back to that contradiction by entailment based on the possibility of knowledge.
Right, but I don't know that we've actually gotten a contradiction. Like you could say that maybe particular examples are contradictory, but it seems like you got to say the whole thing is. And well, I mean, sorry, I know that brought us back to, I guess you were saying that bouncing back and forth between things, but I guess I'm just not seeing why like revelation from God is the only possible way to get both first and second order propositions justified at once.
Yeah, and like you said earlier, we may have come to an impasse there. Maybe I'm I'm just looking at the time now. I did want to run something by you because it seems like with your form of foundationalism, you could maybe, and I'd say hand wave, not in a bad way. I'm just like, this argument may not work against your form of foundationalism. And maybe I'm sure you've heard of it before, but I just wanted to run it by you. And then maybe we could get to the questions because there's about a half hour left of what you said.
We got 14 questions so far. So,
oh yeah. All right. So maybe I'll just text that to you later then.
I mean, you can hit me up with it. I'll try to give a brief answer.
Okay. It's basically like an argument about arbitrariness. Here it is. So this is, I steal all of my arguments. I'm completely unoriginal, by the way.
I steal most of mine as well.
So aren't we all?
Don't worry.
So this one, I don't know if this is actually from Jub. So I don't know if Jub made this argument, but that's where I got it from. Gosh,
there's an infinite regress of stealing going on from everyone.
The formatting is awful here in the side chat. So for future reference, if you ever need to put something that needs to be formatted in the side chat, you got to paste it in separate chats. So the ordinary language reductio, there are properly basic beliefs such that a person's properly basic belief that P is justified, although there are no further reasons behind that. And if there are no further reasons behind that, believing P, then there are no better reasons for believing P's contrary, not P. Therefore, there's no reason to have P be properly basic as opposed to not P. So foundationalism is false by implication. And then there's the formal all MRB, all ARM, all ARB. All beliefs justified without further reasons, M, are beliefs that have no reason to be preferred over their contraries. B, all properly basic beliefs, A, are beliefs justified without further reasons. M, all properly basic beliefs, A, are beliefs that have no reason to be preferred over their contraries. B. And then it just has the major terms and notes.
Yeah, so I mean, two major issues with this. The first one is it looks to me like the conclusion just straightforwardly doesn't follow. It looks like the conclusion at best would be that foundationalism is like arbitrary or something like that, but it doesn't actually follow that foundationalism's false unless you add a further premise to this saying that, like, in order to be an adequate theory, it would have to be able to show that its basic beliefs are better than another. I think that's probably assumed in there, and if you add that in, then I think the conclusion does follow. So that's kind of a nitpick, but that should probably be made explicit in the premises. Obviously, my main objection is going to be to premise one here, because I don't take the position that there are properly basic beliefs such that, you know, they're justified, but there are no reasons behind them, right? I distinguish between reasons or justification and beliefs. So I think that there can be non-propositional justification in the form of acquaintance relations. So on my view, properly basic beliefs, there is a further reason to believe them, but that reason doesn't consist of a further belief. It consists of a relation. So it's not that there's no reason to believe them. It's just that that reason doesn't consist of a further belief. So yeah, I reject the first premise.
Cool. Well, I would love to go further into it, but I think we should just go to the questions at this point.
We got a lot to go through.
Yeah, so let's go through the super chats first. I'll just bring up the ones that are not questions real quick to say thank you. Corey, appreciate you. Thanks for the $5. Daedalus, grift activated. Sweet. Daedalus is always very gracious with his money. So thank you, Daedalus. And Richie Torres, love you, brother. What happened to Pallmann, dude? He's jacked all of a sudden. You been working out, dude?
A little bit. Marriage does stuff to you.
Nice. Usually people get fatter during marriage. I mean, dude, when I had my first kid, I gained like 40 pounds, and that was me. I wasn't even pregnant.
That's fair enough. I have heard that there's like an equivalent to the freshman 15 for getting married. So
yeah, cool. All right, Jub, you can go into the questions now. There's one super chat question, I believe.
Yeah, I got from Apophatic. Much love to Jib for this entertainment stream. I have a question for Wi-Fi. Thank you, Apophatic. Appreciate your $10. So the question for Wi-Fi from Apo is, why can't we justify first principles by retorsion justification?
So retorsion, I'm assuming this is like a transcendental for foundational beliefs, such like one that Pallmann gave was with the law of non-contradiction, that you have to assume it in order to be true. I would say that is a justification in a sense. But the problem is not David's form of foundationalism, but a foundationalism that would say these are just foundational beliefs, which no further justification is needed. Like he has the relations. Why can't I say this word? I'm forgetting it already. Relations,
acquaintance.
Acquaintance. Jeez.
In Bertrand Russell's Problems of Philosophy, he kind of introduces this terminology in the chapter, language or knowledge by description and knowledge by acquaintance. So
okay,
if you're trying to think of a term later, I know you've read Problems of Philosophy. Russell was the one who coined this terminology.
Cool, thank you. I'll go back to that. So the reason I brought it up in our conversation is because it seems like if you hold to a form of foundationalism that is just that these are foundational beliefs without further justification, then you can't go ahead and try to make a justification by retorsion, or you undermine your own principle. What would you think about that, David?
Yeah, I mean, I don't believe in bottoming out in unjustified beliefs, which or circularly justified beliefs, because that's the same. That's the same as an unjustified belief to me. Again, that's one of my primary reasons why I don't accept presuppositionalism, because I think it all kind of does bottom out on a belief that can't be justified apart from an appeal to circularity.
And so would you say then that someone could hold to a foundationalism that that bottoms out at foundational beliefs that are justified by retorsion, or like a transcendental argument?
So yeah, retorsion is a new term for me. I just looked it up. But if you're saying that's equivalent to transcendental argument,
Usually, in the context I hear it in.
The issue there is that arguments require premises, even transcendental arguments, and presumably the premises have to be justified beliefs. So I have concerns about how are you going to depend on an inference to justify a non-inferential belief. It would seem contradictory to depend on an argument at like the bottommost level. And I think that's why presuppositionalists typically appeal to sort of a self-justifying revelation. But of course, I have circularity concerns there.
Gotcha. So Jeb, when you bring up the next question, you'll hit show and it'll bring it up on the screen.
I literally typed them out or copy and pasted them from chat
Yeah.
because the star wasn't working for me. So I got them in
gotcha.
note form here.
Yeah, I didn't make you like admin, so yeah, you can just read them.
Okay, so most of the questions are for David, but we do have a good number for U2 Wi-Fi.
Cool.
First one from Cash Connie for Wi-Fi.
Well, let's do back and forth. So give one to David, and then you can give one to me because I just did one.
And Wi-Fi should probably be allowed to offer comments after I answer.
Yeah, same.
Okay, that sounds good. Okay, so a question for David from Cash Connie. How exactly would you get past the criteria problem, specifically in the formulation of which propositions are true? And 2, how can you tell which propositions are true? Each seem to rely on each other. Let me copy and paste this for you because it is kind of a...
I think I know what he's talking about. He's talking about problem of the criteria from, popularized by Roderick Chisholm. So my solution here is basically Richard Fumerton's. He has a paper on this. I believe it's just called The Problem of the Criteria. And he suggests that the theory of direct acquaintance is basically just going to get you both of the things at once. So he classifies it as a form of Methodism, which is not Protestant Methodism. This is epistemic Methodism. I think of it as kind of a hybrid between Methodism and particularism. But essentially, we just appeal to direct acquaintance. It gets us both of those things. And so there's no need to pick one versus the other. That would be the snapshot version of my solution to the problem of the criteria.
Gotcha. Do you have any comments on that, Wi-Fi?
Not necessarily. I think let's just like fire through the questions, maybe. Get them all answered.
Going back to Wi-Fi.
If you actually post them in the chat like you did that one, I can bring them up on the screen too.
Yeah, there we go. This one's for Wi-Fi. From Cash Connie. Does the KK principle lead to a non-vicious infinite regress or a vicious infinite regress?
So the KK principle could definitely potentially lead to, well, I don't know if non-vicious and vicious infinite regress is a thing. So like even with like Pallmann doesn't think at all with either way with the circularity it's a thing. But I haven't heard it used with infinite regress.
Yeah, just sorry, are you done, Wi-Fi?
Yeah, I'm done.
Yeah, I'm not sure if vicious turns up in the terms of infinite regress. There is a question of whether infinite regresses are problematic or not. I think that they are. There are some people who don't. I actually have the two most recent defenses of that. So this would be Fading Foundations and then Epistemology and the Regress Problem by Scott Aiken. So those would be defenses of the idea that an infinite regress is not actually problematic. So if you're interested in that question and you want a defense of that idea, I refer you to those two books, but I don't think that they quite work.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm posting the next one here. This is a question for David by the Eclipsed Axis. I am swimming. The proposition I am swimming doesn't need a justification. But what makes this belief privileged as the foundation rather than any others? And how can we be sure that labeling them as self-justified doesn't itself require justification, thus reintroducing the very regress foundationalism is meant to avoid?
So this seems like it's probably based on a misunderstanding from earlier in the conversation. The proposition or the belief, I am swimming, if you hold that belief, that would need justification. I take the position that any belief that you hold requires justification. What I was saying before is that activities don't require justification. So the act of swimming or the act of running or the act of sneezing, these are not propositionals, right? Like if I sneeze, was it true or false, right? Doesn't make any sense to even ask the question. Actions are not true or false. And I use that in the context of reason to say it doesn't really make sense to ask for reason to be justified because it's the act or the process of making inferences. But yeah, the belief I am swimming would absolutely need justification on my view.
So if actions don't need justification, then how can they be used as a justification?
Presumably they can't. I mean, I would never appeal to an action or an activity to justify a belief.
Well, didn't you say that relations acquisition? Did I get that right? Acquaintance. Why did I say acquisition? Relations acquaintance is an act, right?
No, it's just a relation.
No.
Yeah.
So you're saying relations don't need justification.
Relations aren't propositional, so yeah, no.
So then how can something that doesn't need justification be used as a justification?
That's kind of the perennial problem or question for theories like mine. My solution to that is to say that it's actually three particular acquaintances again. And remember, I said that this is it's acquaintance with all the constituents of truth, right? Truth bearer, truth maker, and the correspondence relation. So that's all the ingredients for truth. And so like when you have all of that directly in front of your mind, you're directly connected to it. You have all the truth conditions for the proposition. I don't know what else you would want in the way of justification than to literally have all of the truth conditions directly before your mind. Like if you think something else is required, please tell me what that would be, would sort of be my response.
Those truth conditions, are those propositions?
Well, one is the belief is a proposition, but no, the correspondence between the proposition and the truth maker, those two are not going to be propositions.
Okay. And so you make a distinction between like the three relations versus maybe just one relation. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, well, and the reason for that is something like the problem of the speckled hen, right? If there's a speckled hen that say it's got 50 speckles on it, or if I'm looking at my bookcase right now and let's say it's got 200 books on it, presumably in my visual field, I'm acquainted with that fact, right? There's probably 200 books there. I don't have the thought in my mind. I don't have acquaintance with the correspondence relation there. So I don't know that there are 200 books on the shelf, even if I'm acquainted with that fact. So that's why I say you need all three to have knowledge, because we could think of cases where maybe I'm just acquainted with the thought, maybe I'm just acquainted with the fact, but I don't have the matching between the two. So it's useful for getting around certain objections in philosophy.
So I'm guessing because like with epistemic pluralism, I usually ask the question because they'll say, well, it's not one independent line of justification. It's the coherence between these different lines of justification, right? If I'm saying that correctly.
Yeah.
And usually I ask, well, wouldn't you need like an independent justification of each one in order to have them rely on each other? Mm-hmm. I guess like the thought that pops in my head is there a way to make that argument against why three relations, like why don't each individual relation need to, and again, justification is not the right word, so need to be true or like need to yeah, I guess maybe that's the way to put it, in order for all of them to work. Like I'm not making the argument very well here, but
yeah, they would all need to exist in order for you to have knowledge.
So you don't have to independently verify them?
You don't have to. I mean, you can have a further acquaintance relation with your acquaintance relations. Like if you have a doubt, like, am I acquainted with it? Then, but like, if that's the doubt, I don't know that appealing to a further acquaintance relation is going to be satisfactory, because so like there is a potential infinity there if you want to keep asking those questions. But no, my theory would be if you have those three, that is sufficient for knowledge. You don't have to have further acquaintance relations for those, though I think that they do exist.
Okay, I don't want to ask more on this. Let's go to another one.
All right. The next question is for Wi-Fi. I put it in chat or private chat there.
Yeah.
I can paste it into the comments again.
I got it. Yeah, if you just paste it into the comment, and then you can show it like that.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for bearing with me. I'm new. So question for Wi-Fi by Cash Connie again. Do you believe in stance-independent facts? And if so, how can tag be made as an argument without assuming the stance-independent fact that knowledge exists or experience exists in a certain way?
So stance-independent facts, like facts that are true regardless of my stance on them, if that's what you mean, like objective truth, yeah, objective truth exists. If how can tag be made as an argument without assuming the stance-independent fact that knowledge exists or experience exists? I'm not exactly getting the question. Do you understand it more than I do, David?
It's strange terminology to use because the term stance independence is pretty rigidly restricted to the field of meta-ethics. So I don't know if he's saying, do you believe in stance independent moral facts, or is he saying you believe in any? I mean, either way, I'm assuming the answer is going to be yes, you believe in those things. I doubt you think that the argument could be made, though, if there aren't like stance independent facts about knowledge or the world or something like that.
Yeah, because that seems like the other position would be relativism.
Yeah, or maybe some type of really bizarre idealism, but yeah, it would be something strange that I'm fairly confident that you don't believe, especially if you are leaning towards Eastern Orthodoxy. For the record, I'm a little bit weird among Christians in that I don't actually believe in stance-independent moral facts, but obviously I do believe in some stance-independent facts. And I don't think a tag argument is going to be successful either way, but it certainly isn't going to work if there's no stance-independent facts.
I don't usually, and like with morality, I know there are people who do make, like I could make the argument that Christianity has objective morality, but I wouldn't make an argument that objective morality exists, therefore God exists ever. I think that's a really weak argument. But question for you, like, do you know any other Christian who holds that position that you hold? Okay. Interesting.
He's a professor, and I don't want to say his name because he is a professor at a Christian institution. I don't want to get him in trouble because, unfortunately, like, moral anti-realism gets a lot of hate for really weird reasons because I think a lot of people don't actually understand it. But yes, to answer your question, I do know of at least one Christian academic who holds the
Do you have any videos on this?
So I have a video on the moral argument where I explain why I don't think it's a very good argument for theism, and I touch on this. I've had requests since then by a lot of other people.
I'm sure you have.
To explain, like, tell us, bro, how do you be a Christian without being a moral realist? I am working on putting something together on that front, and I just kind of want to begin by clearing up a lot of misconceptions. Like, if you're a moral anti-realist, it doesn't mean you can't think anything is bad or evil or whatever. In fact, my meta-ethical theory is not that much different than like the divine command theory of the person who's just sitting in the pew, right? Like, if you ask me why I think something's good or bad, I'm going to say because God said so, right? But that is actually not compatible with moral realism. So it's not as weird as it might sound at first. But yeah, I do want to do a video at some point to just get it all out there because so many people have asked me.
Cool. Yeah. And yeah, I am interested as well.
Awesome. Next question is for David by Enslaved by Truth. Can Pallmann give some input on this claim that's made by taggers that there are two types of epistemology, theonomous and autonomous epistemology?
Yeah, so the way I understand this term, and this term autonomous epistemology, well, I shouldn't be too broad because there is actually now a field of epistemological autonomy. But typically, autonomous epistemology or autonomous human reasoning, that's a term that pretty much is exclusively used by presuppositionalists. I think they kind of use it as an umbrella term for anything that's not presuppositionalism. So, I mean, technically, yeah, it's true by definition that you've got two epistemologies. You've got the presuppositionalist one and everything else. But I mean, that's kind of true of everything, right? Like, I'm a classical foundationalist. You have that in everything else, right? Alvin Plantinga holds to the theory of warrant and proper function. You have that and everything else. So, I mean, yes, it's true. It's trivially true.
Yeah, I don't have any input on that.
Okay. Next question is for Wi-Fi by Kashkani. Pasting it now. Kashkani, thank you for your questions. You've been awesome. If it is the case that knowledge presupposes God, how do you jump to the metaphysical claim that God exists and that knowledge exists, rather than knowledge just being impossible? Oops, sorry.
No, that's
a really good question.
If it is the case that knowledge presupposes God, that I would say God is a necessary precondition for knowledge, if that means the same thing. Knowledge yeah. How do you jump to the metaphysical claim that God exists and that knowledge exists rather than knowledge just being impossible? Because knowledge being impossible, and David admitted that it would at least be self-defeating, but I would even say impossible. Like, it's the contradiction by entailment. Now, I think, and David can say in a second, that David agreed that without his form of classical foundationalism, all other epistemic theories would, or at least the ones he's aware of. I think that's the way he put it. So I would think that the fact that if it is true, like you said, if it is the case that knowledge presupposes God, if it is impossible for knowledge to exist, then the existence of knowledge would prove the existence of God. Or if I didn't word that correctly, if knowledge being impossible is true under all epistemic theories that don't have God as a necessary precondition for knowledge, then it would follow that from the statement knowledge exists, God exists.
Yeah, this is actually an independent line of objection that I have to the transcendental argument that is being hit on here, which is essentially that I think that given presuppositionalism, like given the sort of epistemology that it entails, you actually can't affirm the proposition that knowledge is possible or that it exists, just because I think presuppositionalism entails global skepticism, because I think it depends on circular reasoning. So that's kind of a separate line of argument, not one that we really got into here. It's actually just a really good question in general, though. What Connie's kind of hitting on there is a general objection to ambitious transcendental arguments that was raised by Barry Stroud, which essentially shows he essentially argued that ambitious transcendental arguments, they can show you like what you might have to believe, right? Like, I have to believe that knowledge exists, and so I have to believe that God is possible, or rather, I have to believe that God is real because I believe knowledge is possible. But transcendental arguments fundamentally lack the resources to actually discharge the conditional. They actually can't tell you whether, in the case of this argument, that knowledge is possible. They don't have the resources to do that. Now, I know Wi-Fi has an argument for this because he thinks it's actually contradictory. So it's a necessary truth that knowledge exists. I don't. And fundamentally, the reason why is because there's not a contradiction in the proposition that, knowledge is impossible. I don't think that proposition is true, but I don't think it's an impossible proposition because there's not a logical contradiction. But different argument for a different day.
Cool. Now, would you say, just real quick on it, that if it weren't the case, like if you didn't believe that tag led to global skepticism, would it then change that answer?
If I didn't think that tag led to global skepticism, would it change? Which answer would that change?
The fact that the conditional in the first syllogism, if knowledge is possible, then God exists.
So I think Stroud's objection would still hold, right? That a transcendental argument is not going to be enough to discharge that conditional. You could theoretically do it in some other way, though, apart from an appeal to a transcendental argument. As it happens, though, yeah, I just don't think presuppositionalists can, because I do think it leads to global skepticism. So yes, if I didn't think it led to global skepticism, you could hypothetically have some other way to discharge the conditional, but just given a transcendental argument, I think Stroud's criticism holds.
Okay, thanks. Probably have time for one more question.
So far we have about 9. 9 left to go. So 2 of them are for Wi-Fi, and then I'm sorry.
There's only 2 minutes. 2 minutes left anyway. Probably just end there.
Okay.
I mean, I'm okay with, like, if we want to shotgun through them and give briefer answers if we want to, unless you got to go Wi-Fi. Then.
No, I don't have to go. If you want to let's just whoever they're answered for or asked to, just give a really quick answer then, unless you really want to give a counter to.
We'll raise our hands if we really want to say something.
Okay, cool.
Okay, next question.
Don't even paste them, just read them.
PMAR says, your worldview may dodge contradictions, but can it actually unify facts into a whole? For example, you say that logic is universal, but the universe is random. How do you hold those?
Is this being asked to me?
Yes, for David.
Yeah, I don't think that I ever said that the universe was random. I'm not an atheist, but fundamentally, this seems to me like it's a sort of one in the many sort of argument. And I just deny the existence of the one, right? Because I'm a nominalist. So I don't think that you need a one to unify the many. And I've yet to see an argument from a presuppositionalist for the thesis that I do need something to unify particulars together.
Okay. I'm going to do another one for David because more of them were for David than Wi-Fi. There's only one more for Wi-Fi. So let's do from Cash Connie again for David. If there are no stance-independent normative facts, then how could you say that there is a way to do your epistemology or philosophy, or that your way isn't arbitrary?
Yeah, so it's not going to be arbitrary if one establishes, certain goals for epistemology, right? So in epistemology, I want justified true beliefs. Given that goal, then there are going to be stance-independent facts about what is the best way to achieve that goal, which I think is met in classical foundationalism. I don't need stance-independent normative facts to do that at all. I would only need that if I was saying that somebody who doesn't share my goal of having justified true beliefs, that person has an obligation to do epistemology the way that I do it. That's not my claim. My claim is that if you share the same goal that I do, this is objectively the best way to get those results. And that does not commit me to stance-independent normative facts.
Gotcha. Okay, going to Wi-Fi now. From Cash Connie. Thank you, Cash. Do you find any of the work by Alvin Plantinga to be useful or compelling?
The only thing I know about Alvin Plantinga is he uses this word warranted true belief for knowledge. And my friend Joel Sedekase at the Think Institute, he helped me work through some infallibilism and fallibilism questions. And part of that was bringing up Plantinga's warranted belief. I don't know if David wants to chime in on this, but he probably has read a lot more and knows more about Plantinga than I do. So sorry if I can't really answer that question.
I'll just say I think Plantinga's work on the problem of evil is decent. I think his epistemology is pretty thoroughly flawed.
Okay, thank you. Another one for David from Cash Connie. How would you object to David Hume's question about how do we know our mental content is caused by causal interaction with the external world, and that it does so reliably?
For a name like Cash Connie, there hasn't been much cash behind these questions. I think right. Jub deserves at least a $5 super chat for reading all these questions.
I don't know if this is distinctly David Hume's question. This is sort of one of the perennial questions of philosophy, but it would be broadly along the lines that I sketched to Wi-Fi earlier when I just sort of said that I think it's going to be broadly by an inference to the best explanation based on a priori justified inference rules.
Gotcha. Okay, so I only have one more for Wi-Fi, so I'm just going to save it for until we do a few more for David. David has 4 more. So another question for David is from Cash Connie, of course.
And let's cut off any future questions.
Okay.
Like yeah, just the ones we have.
Cash Connie says, for David, are things like reliability of memory, cognitive faculties, senses, etc., are they just accepted dogmatically? Is it logical and physically possible that they aren't?
They're not just accepted dogmatically in my epistemology, no. It is logically and physically possible that they aren't, and so that's the very reason why some sort of further justification is needed. Similar to the general argument that I gave for the reality of the external world would apply here as well. There's a philosopher called Ali Hassan out there. I would just refer you to some of his papers on things like the reliability of memory, where he has sort of argued for an inference to the best explanation approach to these sorts of other questions that aren't addressed as much by classical foundationalists. And he explains how you can sort of make that inference from within a classical foundationalist framework.
Okay, thank you for that. This one is another one for David by PMARS. In a naturalistic worldview, though the connection is a mystery, why should abstract symbols invented by humans map perfectly onto the external world?
Well, so yeah, I mean, it depends a little bit on what you mean by a naturalistic worldview. If that means a physicalistic worldview, then I'm going to agree with you that like you just wouldn't have abstract symbols. I don't think you would have consciousness and thought, right? I'm a very committed substance dualist, right? I've spent more time on my channel arguing against mind-body physicalism than just about anything else. I think it's a necessarily false position, right? I'm a Cartesian dualist. Now, if naturalistic there kind of is meant more broadly to include that, then, I mean, maybe it would be a bit of a mystery as to how sort of our ideas map onto the world. That's fine. I don't know that that's necessarily an argument against it, but yeah, it'd be a mystery.
Okay, thank you. I have a last one for Wi-Fi by Shadow Slays. He says, how can you account for the geological argument against God? Statistically speaking, you are more likely to be a theist if you were born in India as opposed to Sweden.
Yeah, I mean, I think that really has no bearing on the truth. You're more likely to believe all sorts of different things based on where you're born. But it quite literally happens every day that people are persuaded of other beliefs than the major belief where they are. I would be interested to hear David's comments on that.
Yeah, it's just a textbook genetic fallacy. It could potentially indicate that maybe somebody's beliefs aren't justified or they need to question them, but it can't indicate that they're false.
Awesome. 2 more for David. This one is from Cash Connie, of course. Could we have direct access to universals in the mind of God because we're created in his image?
I mean, I don't see how being created in someone's image is not being created in their mind, right? Understanding that, like, for the Anderson-Welty version of divine conceptualism that I was arguing against, these are thoughts within God's minds, which are in very many ways like similar to our thoughts, except the difference is, right, that these ones are necessary and presumably there's some way to get access to them. I don't see that being created in God's image is going to explain how you have access to God's thoughts the way that, you know, we do our own. Presumably God has all sorts of thoughts that we don't have access to, right? So some sort of explanation is needed why these particular ones, like laws of logic, why is it we have explanations to those ones?
Awesome. And then we have one more. Last question is for David by Cash Connie. Why the correspondence view of truth rather than any other view? Doesn't it seem arbitrary to choose that one?
Yeah, this is a very interesting question that I actually wrestled with for a little bit. So one reason to take the correspondence theory of truth in like common parlance would just be that that tends to map onto how most people use the term, right? But if you're asking the question, right, is the correspondence theory of truth true? It's a little bit of a different question because it's not clear what does true mean in that sentence, right? Because if we're not taking truth as correspondence, then what are you asking, right? What does the question even amount to? It's not clear. I have a whole article written on this on the website Cerebral Faith, where I actually interacted with Dr. Chris Bolt and Brian Knapp, who are two other presuppositionalists, of course, of the Calvinist variety, where I interacted with some of the challenges that they put to me. So if you want my more extended thoughts, go there. But basically, I just appeal to a stipulative definition here, right? What I mean by truth is correspondence. How do I know that correspondence relations exist? Surprise, surprise, I'm directly acquainted with them. That's why I believe that correspondence relations exist. And those are just the things that I'm talking about when I talk about truth. Is that arbitrary? I mean, I don't know. Maybe not. It's perfectly workable, though.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. I really appreciate the audience's questions. If it's okay, David, can I ask you one question, just as an audience question, so to speak? About the acquaintance relations, is there a similarity between an acquaintance relation and the criteria of basic beliefs like self-evidence?
The problem is it's not altogether clear what self-evident is supposed to mean, and different philosophers use it in different ways. I don't tend to use that terminology myself, but arguably with some older philosophers, when they were using that term, they might have had something in mind with reference to what I'm talking about by direct acquaintance. I guess the answer would be it sort of depends on who you ask. I don't typically think of them that way, though.
Because usually, at least the material I've read on classical foundationalism, basicality criteria include self-evidence, evident to the senses, and then the third one is incorrigibility.
Yeah, I tend to associate them more with evident to the senses and incorrigible.
Gotcha. All right. Awesome. Do you guys have anything else you want to add before I close it out?
Well, I was just going to say thanks for having the conversation with me, Wi-Fi. Like I said, and I don't mean to keep hating on presuppositionalists, but a lot of them,
you do.
They don't seem open to like conversations like this where I can't reason with them, or it's all about like scoring points or asking me about some obscure part of philosophy that I've never heard of so they can trip me up. I didn't get that with you. You seemed like a lot more actually interested in the issues. And so that's, I appreciate you having the conversation with me, appreciated your demeanor. And so, yeah, thanks for the chat.
Yeah, same here. Thank you very much for doing this. It's definitely given me some things to think about. So maybe we can have a follow-up discussion after I think about these things more. I appreciate your knowledge of philosophy in general. And I do think I don't have too many connections, but there are people who I know who are much more qualified for these discussions. And maybe if you're open to have those discussions with them, we could set that up too. Yeah,
me and Father Deacon were supposed to have a conversation at one point, and it sort of fell through. I don't know if he's one of your connections, but I would like to actually still have that conversation with him at some point.
I think I could try to set that up.
Works for me.
Awesome. Thank you again, guys. David Pallmann, I just want to also say that I saw you have a DVD Blu-ray collection. I am also a fellow collector of physical media. I really like it. So keep that up. It seems like we're done. Make sure you guys in the audience go to Wi-Fi Gospel's channel, and also David Pallmann's channel, which is called, I believe,
Faith Because of Reason.
Faith Because of Reason. Awesome. Okay, and sorry about screwing up with the intro. That he's not a student; he is a graduate. I just saw it on a website. It said you were a student still. So
yeah, some of them never updated it. I wrote for them while I was still a student, so I don't hold it against you.
Cool. All right, guys. Thank you so much. Appreciate you.
Yeah, have a good night, everybody.